We'll talk about Bill Watts and the WWF in more detail, I'm sure, in the future. Smoky Mountain would close up shop in 1995. He would write, he being Jim Cornette, TV markets weren't going to make it in the wrestling recession of the mid-90s. Even the WWF lost $6 million in 1995. I hated to, but I had to close it up in December. So Cornette would close the doors in late November 95, early December, and sell off all of the Smoky Mountain rights and videos to the WWF. And later, he would say that he probably chose the wrong time to start a wrestling fed because the business as a whole was in a recession. And there's been a lot of talk through the history of wrestling that the business is cyclical, and it was obviously in a down when he opened it. Meltzer wrote, the announcement was made to the wrestlers during the intermission at the house show on November 26th in Cookeville, Tennessee by President Jim Cornette. Cornette told the wrestlers that barring a miracle, it would be the group's final show. At the end of the show, in a symbolic gesture after the main event, all the faces and heels joined in, including the Heavenly Bodies, in attacking Cornette and leaving him for dead in the middle of the ring as he was carried back to the dressing room. On the December 18th, 95 edition of The Observer, Meltzer wrote, Jim Cornette had a meeting with Vince McMahon where he was offered a spot helping book, but no word on if he's accepted. So do I have it right here that Cornette wouldn't have moved from Tennessee to Connecticut to take this booking job until Smoky Mountain was completely closed up? So probably late 95, early 96 when he moves?
Yeah, there was absolutely, that wasn't an option for Corny until he just reached the end and knew that Smoky Mountain would not be able to continue. So made the deal to come in.
So he makes the deal to come in, and when he comes in to do creative. I'd love to hear what it sounded like the first time Vince McMahon and Jim Cornette are in a creative meeting together.
Wow. That day, and I forget who all was there. I know it was me, Vince, and maybe Cornette. I don't know if JR was sitting in with us that day or who. I want to say there was somebody else there. But it was, the first time you're feeling someone out, and the first time you get in a meeting, and it's a happy, joy meeting. But Corny was into telling stories, and Vince was kind of feeling Cornette out, and it just got to be a storytelling day. And I remember Corny riding with me, and when it was time to go, Vince pulling me in the kitchen and going, "God damn, pal, can't have another day like that." And I just had to kind of rein Corny in and say, "Hey, man, we got to get down to business." But it was just a strange day, the first day, and Vince started second guessing himself. But it was simply a feeling out day, and it was just simply guys getting comfortable with everybody. But Cornette had a completely different philosophy on things, and the idea was for Vince McMahon to take that time and spend more time in the office, and for Cornette and I to kind of take over the television writing, let Jim Ross take over the day-to-day booking of the house shows, and Vince McMahon to kind of just sit back and supervise from afar. So the idea was originally to get me and Corny off to ourselves, kind of like Pat Patterson and I were for a while.
So Cornette, as we mentioned, obviously finds himself moving to Connecticut. I have got to hear some fun stories, and if you don't have anything, then just let me know what it might sound like for Cornette to recap what it was like to live in Connecticut, or the first time he went looking for houses in Connecticut. Give me fucking something.
The fucking Yankee motherfuckers! Corny hated the Northeast, hated Connecticut. And at first he was living downtown Stanford at these high-rise apartments. So you take a country boy from Louisville, Kentucky, and stick him in a high-rise in the middle of Stamford, Connecticut, and he was positively miserable. So he hated the people. He couldn't understand them. They couldn't understand him. What the fuck can't you understand, you goddamn Yankee motherfucker? I'll kill you. It was just a constant battle of us versus them with Jimmy, and he tried hard to fit in, but it was the losing battle on so many fronts. The hatred of, now imagine you're living in the Northeast, and for those of you who have never been in the Northeast, I would say that the Northeast has some of the greatest Italian food outside of Italy, any other place in the world. And Jim had his mom send him Chef Boyardee spaghetti dinners by the case. And when I say by the case, man, I'm talking like the big 24 case of Chef Boyardee spaghetti dinner. Goddamn, it's a full spaghetti dinner. You take the goddamn tomato sauce, you get a pound of goddamn hamburger, you mix the hamburger up with it, you put the tomato sauce in there, you boil the fucking spaghetti. It's a perfect goddamn meal. But all around him are some of the greatest Italian restaurants anywhere in the world.
Sure.
But he thought they sucked, and the Chef Boyardee box spaghetti from Kentucky was better because he couldn't find that in Connecticut because they actually had fresh pasta and real homemade sauce, and he wanted his Chef Boyardee box spaghetti.
I hear you, but let me just go ahead and give a shout out for Chef Boyardee's ravioli and pizza when I was a kid. That stuff was the real MVP.
Oh, you goddamn hillbilly motherfucker, you.
I was a poor white boy from Alabama.
Nothing wrong with that.
Don't be hating.
I ain't hating.
I didn't have all this fanciness that you did as a kid.
I didn't have it until I went up there.
So that makes you better than me?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
All right, then.
So you talked a minute ago about trying to get Cornette kind of off to your own like it was with you and Pat. But there for a while, creative was pretty much just you and Cornette. From win to win, what were the good ideas? What were the bad ideas? What are your favorite memories of doing that?
Well, I'll tell you the funny thing. There were so many just little incidents that happened when we were writing by ourselves. We weren't writing by ourselves. We were actually writing with Vince from time to time. And I remember one day we were at Vince's house, and Cornette hated going to Vince's house too because of the traffic on the Merritt Parkway. Absolutely drove him insane. But every morning it was just a chore. I bought a house in Monroe, Connecticut. The idea in my head was that we would go to my house and work out of my house in Monroe. So I told Corny, get a house, get someplace up in Monroe, which is 45 minutes on a good day to get to the office. But I didn't want to be close to the office because when you're close to the office, you get called into the office a lot. And I liked working out of my house. So Cornette gets a place right not too far from where I was. And we were working at my house. We had a little deal. But I think one of the funniest things was when we would get stuck, we started out the first time and we wrote a pay-per-view. I forget which pay-per-view it was, but at the end of each match, you would write down on the run sheet at the end of the match, okay, boom, so-and-so goes over, music on out. So whenever we would get stuck, we would just look at each other and kind of go, okay, music on out. That was our next transition. Just that's how punchy you kind of get in writing things. But anyway, we get together with Vince one day, and this is before Corny had made the move, and there's no Cornette. So I called Jim. Jim was in Stanford, living in the high-rise at this point. I said, hey, man, where are you? You going to make it in? Oh, goddamn. George died. I'm like, oh, my God, Corny. What do you mean George died? So to give you a little backstory, George was a rat. Do you remember the Mankind vignettes?
Yes.
Do you remember the rat that Mankind had in the original vignettes in the little cell, the Mankind original vignettes with the rat crawling around, crawling all over him?
Are you about to tell me that was Jim Cornette's rat?
That was Jim Cornette's rat, George.
Wait. Is that the first rat Jim Cornette ever had?
That was the first rat that Jim Cornette ever had that had huge balls.
And 4 legs.
Okay.
All right.
So, Jimmy had a pet rat. His name was George.
Who in the business didn't have a pet rat?
There you go. And one of the things that was particularly peculiar about this rat was his large testicles. But I'm calling Cornette on this one day, and George had passed. George had left us. I said, well, oh, man, I'm sorry about that. Well, goddamn, it's terrible. He was sick, and we took him to the vet, and the vet was just beside himself, and they had to do surgery. I said, wait a minute, stop. Corny. You mean to tell me that you took a fucking rat to a vet in Stamford, Connecticut, and they said the rat was sick, but that they could do surgery and make him better? Well, fuck yeah, what would you do if it was one of your loved ones? Sorry. This was so sad. And he described how the rat was laying there, and George was there, and they had like a little apparatus, and they breathed for him during the procedure.
You're fucking making this up.
I swear to God on my children's head. And the nurse sat there, and she puffed little breaths in George's mouth so he could breathe and continue to breathe through the operation, through the surgery. But he didn't make it. He died. $1,100 for a rat surgery.
I thought the purpose of the rats was surgery.
Okay.
I thought they were free.
No. And so Corny missed about 6 weeks worth of work, mourning the rat and laying in bed and holding the box. So being the asshole that I am, I know that's hard to believe. I'm like, all right, man. So what now? So what'd you do? Did they just throw the rat away, or you guys flush it, or what? Fuck you, goddammit! I'll kill you, motherfucker! So, well, Corny, what do you do with a dead rat? Right now, we've got him in the freezer. So, George died. They got the body.
The body.
They got the body.
The body.
They put it in a Ziploc, put it in a fucking shoebox, and put him in the freezer. So that he could
next to the ice cream.
Next to the ice cream and next to the frozen pizza and everything else. So that he can have a proper burial in the Carolinas or Kentucky or wherever the fuck George came from. And so he could be buried with the rest of his rat family. I'm not ribbing. This is a true story. Corny, tell the story on your thing if you want to, but he was distraught and missed work over the rat dying. Very distraught. Because Cornette's a sensitive son of a bitch, man.
Oh, yeah. So, do we know why the rat died?
Maybe it had mesothelioma.